各位好，听得到我的
Hi
声音。
everyone, can you hear me fine?
我是 TIDF 的策展人木子。
I am the program director of
好，
TIDF
那
Woodland.
欢迎大家来参加今天的
Welcome
线上会议。
everyone to the online forum.
好，那在论坛开始之前，我
Before we
先跟大
begin,
家介绍一下这个线
please
上会
allow
议的
me
使
to
用方式。在下方有一
introduce
个键盘
our
的按钮，
interpretation
下
feature.
方应该有一个地球，
Feel free to use it.
地图有一个口译键。
So at the bottom
那大家点选进去，可以有两个选项，一
toolbar,
个是
you will see a
翻译
globe
或者是
that's
中文。那
interpretation,
我们线上也有两位正
and
在
you
翻
will
译，
be able to choose
会翻
the
译
channel
中文跟英
for
文。
either English or Chinese. And there are two interpreters online right now, Howard and Leonard. They will be helping us. They will be doing simultaneous interpretation.
那请务必手
So
截图录
we
影，
are now in recording,
然后
and
呢，
please refrain
最后
from
呢，
making your own
在结
screenshot
束的时
or
候呢，会
recording.
发放提问。那
At the
在
end
提
of
问
the
的时候
forum,
呢，
we
大家
will
可以
open the
在这
floor
个
for questions.
评论区写下自己的问题，中文、英文都可
At the
以。
time,
那我们会从里面
please
挑最多
leave
的
your
提问。
questions in the Q&A
先讲到这边，
area,
呃，
and we will
今
select
天所有的讲者
some
呢，
questions
都可以
accordingly
打开他们的
and
视频，
invite the
然后
panelists to
来开
answer
始
your
提问。
questions. And now I would like to invite all the panelists to turn on their camera and we can begin.
好，那在等待的过程中，
While we're
我这
waiting,
边非常很开心的，TIDF 已经开幕第3天。
I would like to
那
say a few words to
这是
everybody.
一个非常
It's
大的一个
a great moment that we're at the third day of TIDF this year. And the biggest special program for TIDF this year
第一个特别
is with the
的
Philippines,
线上论
with
坛。
the title
今天
of
的题目是
Necessary
关于
Fictions
台湾的
Negotiating Realities in Post National Philippine
今天我们
Documentaries.
的来宾有非常
And
丰富的
today we have
经验，
invited
所以
our
我们今天
co-curator,
要邀请大
Merv,
家
to be the moderator today.
非
And
常
also
欢
we
迎
have invited three very important filmmakers,
我
documentary
是李子璇。
filmmakers from the
那
Philippines.
这个
They are
上台的
Jewel,
是我们
MARANAN,
的导演
Shireen, SENO, and also Tang.
其实今天的
And
节目是在
for more detailed introduction, maybe later we will count on Merv.
预览，
Right.
所
So
以
for TIDF, this is our
这次的这个线上
first
的会议
Zoom online
是
forum since
第
our
一个实验，
establishment in
那
1998.
是这个前提。
So it is rather
所以
experimental.
在菲律宾
We
的
do not
朋友
intend to make it
都
too
可以来跟我们分享。
formal or too academic, but it's more of a experience sharing, and it's
那这个
about sharing
线上会
people's
议
experience about their
现
realities.
在就开始。
Right. So thank
那
you
我
once
们
again for
先
all
介
of
绍
your
一下我们的
participation, and now I would like to turn the control to our co-curator, Merv.
Hello, good evening. Thank you, everyone. First, I'd like to thank the TIDF organizing team and my co-curators, Woodlin and Pei Hua Chung. And we've been talking about this program and deliberating for almost half a year, or more than half a year, maybe with Wood even longer. And the spark actually was quite idiosyncratic because the provocation was to include Roxley. And Roxley is not at all quite representative of Philippine documentary. So it was interesting to position this and make a program around this problem. So first and foremost, I don't think this program, this survey, is representative of Philippine documentary filmmaking. If at all, is it's not even documentary filmmaking in the program, although that's a key feature. The title "Necessary Fictions" is, I guess, lends to that. It's between the co-curators in TIDF. We had different negotiations over the past few months because we all have our respective biases. But it was important to adapt this program within the expectations and the realities and the consciousness of a Taiwanese and a global audience, keeping in mind the history of the festival itself and the films that from the Philippines and Philippine filmmakers from abroad that they've already programmed in the past, and maybe look at them again through a fresh perspective in the contemporary. So, but I'd want with this program the idea like to question the need of representation of both nation states like Taiwan or the Philippines, and the idea of these fixed definitions of moving image forms like documentary, fiction, or experimental, as well as truth and reality at a time when these are both like quite controlled by corporate and state interests. So the title of the program, Necessary Fictions, takes after a Philippine theorist and historian Caroline Howe, and also Friedrich Nietzsche. An alternative title would be like Convenient Lies. Simply put, necessary fictions are those myths and beliefs and institutions that we as a society use to help give the society its shape, like necessary fictions for the functioning of a state, like nations and religions, or the very notion of state itself. So nations as imagined communities, as like Benedict Anderson would say, our own imaginations and biases are like hopefully questioned and interrogated also. So documentary has a kind of historical and special baggage when it comes to portraying truth and reality, but it's only really an aspect of truth and reality determined by both the artists and the filmmakers, and also the curators of programming and festivals that frame them. So this program is a tapestry of different stories, of microhistories, often with very personal, very idiosyncratic, and with varying relationships to truth and reality. And so the three artists, filmmakers are also organizers in themselves, and that I've been working with for more than 10 years, I think. Like I've known and worked for more than 10 years. So Tang Gutierrez MANGANSAKAN is also a noted writer and organizer of Salamindanaw festival based in Mindanao, and Jewel MARANAN, also like recently co-founded Daang Dokyu, which was also quite an inspiration to react to with this Philippine survey. And of course, Shireen, who's been like we've been collaborating for quite a while, who also runs Los Otros and Tito and Tita. And we have our own initiative called Kalampag Tracking Agency. And so, yeah, maybe before we go into larger, broader questions, maybe we can start with the films that they have in the program. Maybe we can start with Jewel. So Jewel has a film in the Philippine program called Tondo, Beloved, To What Are the Poor Born? So let's zoom into this particular work and maybe ask Jewel what led you to this work, and what led you to the documentary filmmaking workshop in 2010, and like, yeah, maybe a bit more background about this work.
Thanks, Merv. So my film Tondo Beloved, I often refer to it as my first documentary, but in fact, it's not my first. I would say it's my first parang initiative that I did on my own. My first documentary that I really made independently. I've been working with the Political Film Collective before this, since I was in college. And I've been involved in other short documentary productions that are intentionally discursive, talks about important issues in the Philippines, in the capital city. So when I was making Tondo Beloved, I was aware it was the first time I was doing something that I could really call my first documentary, my first serious effort at documentary. When I was doing that, though, I was not somebody who would identify myself as an artist even. I was a full-time community organizer in Tondo, Manila. So my mindset was really problem solving for the people I was working with in the community, what their issues are, their problem about housing, etc. It was later on that I would reconnect back to reconnect to my kumbaga, artistic studies as a student of the University of the Philippines Film Institute. Um, and and I'd realized that if I actually uh, make films just from my own instincts, this is what will come out. So in a way, Tondo Beloved is a way was a way for me to discover my language as a filmmaker, not beholden to what do you call that, like requirements of clearly articulating very specific topics or issues. So yeah, that's the background of that film. I started working on it in 2008, and I needed a little funding to push it, primarily to get equipment to use. And I applied for the grant from the NCCA, the National Commission for Culture and the Arts, which I got, which incidentally at that time was also organizing the Reinvigorating Documentary Filmmaking in the Philippines workshop through the efforts of film historian and archivist Teddy Ko. So the film I've been working on for almost a year already was kumbaga was also processed in that workshop when I was invited to join. But I'd say the motivations, and I'd say also the origins of how it came out to be is really coming from the process which I went through while making it, which was highly immersive. So that's also the reason why the film, if you look at it, is very experiential, because my goal was actually to impart the experience of being in that place in a community in Tondo called Happy Land, and see similarities with people whom we would normally, from our background at least, or from my background as a person, um, think that I have more differences than similarities. So that's eventually how it came out for me. I don't know if you have any specific questions. Maybe I can answer.
Maybe just to follow up, like how did you decide on the particular style of the this observational approach
I, I
to that film?
Okay. I really wouldn't, before I would know the definition of observational, I was making that film already that way. So it wasn't really a decision of a style. It was really more for me a discovery of my relationship with the camera, at the same time of how I could use it, and how it felt in my hand. At the same time that I was there, not just as an artist, but as a person who's immersing myself in something that's where I did not, that's not like, what do you call that? That's in something that's where a lot of discovery could be made, because it's not where I grew up in. It's not something that's like entirely familiar to me. So for me, the style was really a process of discovering, came out from the process of discovering my own language. In hindsight, I wouldn't even just categorize it as an observational documentary. Part of it is also experiential. Part of it is also embedding discourse and viewpoints in an observational approach, I would say. There's a lot of embedded messages that not messages, could be embedded meanings actually, that I knew I was consciously like making while doing the cinematography itself. This film was shot purely handheld. I didn't even have a budget to buy a tripod that time. So talagang this also influenced my style even when I continued making documentaries. For me, I cannot just hold any camera. I need a camera that I can really hold close to my body. And in a way, not necessarily just copy my experience, but be there with me. And in the kumbaga parang in a way, I also would like to impart that kind of experience to my audience, like something that simulates a memory of being somewhere.
So, I mean, for someone like you who's aware of your previous works, no, was there like a really conscious decision to just like create a kind of personal style? Because the ones that you made before with your collective were quite, journalistic. It didn't have that intimate feeling that you have with this first documentary of yours.
There was really no conscious effort to arrive at a style or to avoid any specific style, to be honest. I was really, I would say, I was in a trance most of the times when I was doing this documentary. Um, and I felt pulled by the images that my camera was capturing. I felt pulled as well by the images that were being framed. Because Tondo is a very rich, it's a very rich place visually. You would see traces of many things, even if you actually don't try to put meanings. There's meaning everywhere. You could see traces of colonialism. You could see traces of the different influences that are there. During election time, it's filled with the different political forces that are trying to win over the community. So it's really a place that's rich with meaning that all manifest visually. So I was being pulled by those parang in the frame of a camera. I was practically like discovering the place visually, this time using a tool in my hand. So I was discovering both the tool, my relationship with it, and how the realities, the rich and conflicted realities of Tondo, Manila was appearing with this like presence.
But how about your relationship to the environment and the people, your subjects? Like, what was the reaction of them, like having you around, and also like them as audience when they saw the film?
That's really a good question kasi uh, that the kind of relationship I had with the people I filmed with and the place also gave me that liberty and comfort to be kumbaga parang to have this to be able to discover my film language while doing this, because I was not worried so much about how I was going to convince people, etc., because as I said, I was already living in the place practically for more than 2 years, because I was a community organizer. And as a community organizer, it doesn't mean you're always working, you're always talking with people, doing campaigns, etc. There's a lot of downtime as well. There's a lot of time where I'm just sitting down on a corner of a house or sleeping in one of the hammocks in one of the houses there, or playing cards with mothers or playing other stuff with kids, etc. So I was, I guess I was, my presence there was very normal, very ordinary, and yon didn't pose any additional pressure on the filmmaking itself, even on the way that I did my cinematography. So a lot were quite easy actually. When they saw the film after I finished it, I made sure that they would see it first. Um, they actually, more than anything, what they were seeing was their younger selves, because I would film it. I filmed it like 2 years earlier than they before they saw it when the film was done. So the normal reaction for everyone would be really to try to spot themselves and reflect on how things have changed, how the walls of the house have changed, how the kid has grown so much, etc. And in a way, also make them reflect on how fast um, things changed and what happened in the community during the time that the film was being cooked for uh, showing or screening.
All right. Thank you, Jewel. I think that's a good segue to. I'll leave you off the hook for now, and maybe we can move on to Shireen. Like moving from something really like immersive, like like from a production point of view, and like even in terms of like viewing it, Jewel's film. Um, Shireen's To Pick a Flower and A Child Dies are like have a different process. And To Pick a Flower looks at like colonial history through like an investigation of archival photos and plants in the Philippines. And A Child Dies starts with like the bird migration, also inspired by family histories of your own personal histories of migration. So yeah, so the projects start with memory and personal experience, and maybe you can tell us more about this approach. And
Thank you, Merv. Yeah, I was really connecting to a lot of what Jewel was saying about being pulled in different directions, and about what you said about presence. I grew up mostly outside of the Philippines. I grew up in Japan, and I was quite oblivious to a lot of things that were going on, both in Japan and in the Philippines. I think I lived quite a sheltered. I had quite a sheltered childhood, and but there's definitely a feeling. I grew up with a supreme kind of emptiness, and I think it had a lot to do with not really being connected to where I was and where I was from. So there's a lot of disconnect between what's going on inside of me and what's going on around me. And so I guess I stumbled upon film, and it ended up studying it in university, film studies, not filmmaking. And I was really moved. I was really I felt this kind of call to action to move. I was moved to write and to curate films in the beginning. And I felt that it was through films that there was this kind of convergence of the forces inside me and outside me. I felt this kind of synergy between my own history, my own personal background, growing up a Filipina in Japan, and then ending up, for what reason, in Canada studying. And so it was a kind of awakening of sorts to the affective possibilities of film. And so in the beginning, I really wanted to write and curate, and I felt I had to show more of this kind of cinema in Japan, where I had to go back to Japan first to sort of come to terms with this this emptiness of having grown up there but not really being connected to the place and to the people. And so I wanted to share a part of me that was through Filipino films, and I wanted to show works that sort of had this kind of dimension, this quality of showing not just a very linear kind of histories or any kind of stereotypical kind of imagery, or so I wanted to show works that moved me personally, but also had the possibility to really show a different side of the Philippines, and ended up moving here instead of continuing on in Japan. I moved here in 2009, and I was really affected by the energy here and this movement, the independent film movement, in generating a kind of this connection between the personal and also the political, what's going on around us, what's going inside and outside, how to negotiate these forces. And so little by little, I started making of my own. I was really impressed and moved by what everyone was making and doing, and it was contagious. I wanted to be a part of it, and find myself just making my own sort of things to exercise my own ghosts. And so it was a mix of looking at I guess I start from a personal memories, personal stories, and try to mine that part of me, and then try to have a conversation with these memories and my past self and my present self, and see where I am now, and where have this kind of not so linear way of working, but going back and forth between times and places. So I made Child Dies. It's an ongoing project inspired by my own family's migration, and a story of that I heard from my father about an encounter he had with a wild duck in the United States. And I myself am very scared of birds. So I thought before I made anything that has to do with birds, I have to confront this fear. And so I started off by trying to look at birds in areas that are close to Manila, because I have a limitation of I had a young child in 2018, and I can only go so far. So I went to two places not so far from Manila, and I worked with I consulted an ornithologist at UP to try to, get to know more about birds. And so it's a kind of very starts from a very personal place, but then it just very process based. So from the footage that I shot, I borrowed from the ornithologist this kind of spotting scope. It's like a telescope for bird watchers. And so I just shot like with an iPhone through the spotting scope. And I really liked the quality of the way the image sort of had this kind of the autofocus of the iPhone had this quality that changed had this kind of flashing kind of bright effect on the image. And so I decided to use that instead of the cleaner image of DSLR. Just use the iPhone one, and just frame these birds kind of very voyeuristically. But the idea was to bring together a mix of local species and migratory ones, and who find themselves together at some point in the Philippines, because it's on this sort of the midpoint of their migratory path from northern Asia and to the south. And so and then it's an ongoing project. So I've been expanding it and trying to use different footage. The first version I used my own footage, and then in the second one I used home video footage of my own family, and this is the one that is being shown at TIDF now. And then in a latter version, I also worked with bird watchers. I was able to borrow their images and then use it for another one. And then the other work that is being shown in TIDF now is Too Big a Flower. And as Merv said, it's kind of an essay film on using archival photographs from the American colonial period. And I was aware of two photographic archives online that have a wealth of images. There's the University of Michigan of the Philippines, University of Michigan and University of Wisconsin, that have so many digitized images, photographs from this period online, and are very accessible. So I was able to, I knew they existed, and the hard part was how to go through and find images that to work with, because there's so many. And so I was just so fatigued. And finally I came across this image of a bride posing next to a potted plant. And I think I laughed out loud, because I found it so funny compared to, there's other images, there's so many. And then you just came across this one, and I was just, I thought I had to do something with this, and I had to see if this was a common practice, to photograph brides with potted plants. And so it led me from one thing to another, from like plants and to anything related to trees, and then on to the timber and lumber industry, and then it back to forestry. So it was kind of a digging through the notes and the tags on the images, and then thinking about the images themselves, and just speculating on things around these images, rather than trying to because there's such a density to the history behind the lumber industry. I found it's quite dense, and so it's more of a speculative approach, and it was like a black hole to go into this kind of history. So I guess my work is a way of trying to make sense of things from my own past, and then to reassess them in relationship to the present.
And I really like that this film was made like pretty much over your laptop, like during the pandemic.
Yes, exactly. I could not leave. I had two young kids, so it's like, what can I do? I have to work with what I have, and it's just and there's so much, I feel there's so much we can do with, found footage is a really interesting way of approach. I think there's so many kinds of footage that you can use and make and activate.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Shireen. Yeah, let's move on to Teng. First and foremost, I have to say that the ambitions of this program far outweighed the limitations of budget and time. So we wanted to program several films in this May, but we had to move on. We had to actually divide the program into two segments. So it'll be in the latter part of the year. So I'm sorry that to the local audience in Taiwan that some of the films maybe I'm referencing in my question to Teng, you won't actually see yet, but Teng contributed a text called "Charting the Documentary of Terrain of Mindanao" in the publication that this program is part of. So just to describe Teng's first documentary from 2000, which I'm happy that he found again after some prodding. House Under the Crescent Moon has the background of the war between government and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front in Mindanao, MILF, MLF. And it was quite an interesting kind of journey seeing you progress from that to personally still my favorite of your works, Obscured Histories and Silent Longings of the Guluan's Children from 2012, which looked into your father's hometown in Cotabato. And both films reveal the history and socio-political situation in Mindanao from a very personal perspective. And I really like this kind of rapport that your kind of Ova as well as Jajas can bounce each other. And I want to ask your background of your family in Mindanao and why this particular perspective, and how important is it for you to give a different take on the documentary medium in Mindanao?
Yeah. Hello. Thanks, Merv. My family has been in politics for many decades. My grandfather was the governor of the Cotabato province from 1946 to 1968, with only a very short break in between. So it was a very big province then, called the Empire Cotabato province. Today, it has been divided into 5 provinces. So aside from him, we also have Senator Salipana Pendato, my grand uncle. So all my life, I grew up with these people, but I really didn't know who they were when I was growing up. I grew up very sheltered. My mom was mayor at that time when I was growing up in Maguindanao. We initially we live in this strange big red house in the middle of rice fields in our hometown. So that red house, I had a lot of experience of the house, very fun experience of childhood in that house. I came to know my grandfather when I was living there because he also lived there. When I moved to the city to school, we would just go back to our hometown during the summer vacations, and somehow I became disconnected with the house and our town, and I got myself preoccupied with a lot of things. I went to pre-med because I really wanted to become a neurosurgeon. But midway through pre-med, I saw some films in Manila and decided, I think I want to become a filmmaker. So when I re-enrolled, I shifted to a communications course to pursue filmmaking. After a while, I went to Manila. Moel Fan Film Institute was offering a 60 millimeter filmmaking workshop then, so I enrolled. I got a slot. It was kind of selective. Uh, so that's how I started. It was a feature filmmaking workshop. So I specialize in art direction. After during my stint at Moel Fan, I kind of grew close to Nick Diocampo, who I saw as a kind of a mentor. I saw his films, and I listened to a lot of his lectures. And somehow, when a few years later, when war erupted in Mindanao in the year 2000, I went home. And I saw my grandfather's red house transform into a refugee house. So thousands of people took refuge in that house, and somehow I felt that I needed to take footages of those people. So while I was having coffee in the morning, I was having my lunch, because by then we already had a house. A few meters away from the old red house. So I would visit the refugees and then film footages of their daily lives. And at the end of the year, I managed to edit a short documentary called House Under the Crescent Moon, which was basically a juxtaposition of my own childhood and experience of the house versus the lives and experience of those people who have taken refuge in the house. So that was how I made that. And from then on, I did more shorts on the war, but I really didn't I didn't make a film, or I didn't make films that directly tackle the war. It was always somehow indirect. The effects of the war on children, for instance, or how women were affected by war, and how war and strife have become part of their consciousness. So I made a series um, of short documentaries. In 2008, I started making House Under the Crescent, no, Obscure Histories. It was supposed to be my first film. I shot it in 2008, but somehow it took me a while to edit the film, so it came out in 2012. So eventually, it became my third film, fourth film. So yeah, so I think the challenge in House and in Obscure Histories was really, how do I make a documentary with magic realist elements, and not look like they're fictional, because in Southeast Asian culture, especially where I grew up, magic realism, truth, reality, myth, all these come together as one. We don't really see a lot of blurring of the lines. So that became one of the challenges in making Obscure Histories, how to make uh, those elements that are supernatural, uh, magic realists, work in a documentary sense. So it took me 4 years to make that. And yeah, and I think it's a story that I kind of really gravitate towards, since the story is really about arrival, departures, and staying. And I felt that that's my story. I grew up in my hometown, and then I left and returned and started to rediscover again my hometown, my roots. Some things I had to reckon with, because by then some of the things are somehow not in line with what I believe in. So it was a process, really a process of rediscovery, and I think it's also a process of finding my artistic voice, because House Under the Crescent Moon and Obscurity series, when it comes to artistic uh, uh, choices, they're very much different. So I think with Obscure Histories, I really felt that this film really spoke about who I am as a filmmaker, and how my worldview was shaped by my hometown, by growing up in Mindanao, and the people that I've come to know and come to become friends with, and I think it's something that I always look back to as a really good reminder of how to know, uh, be open about knowing yourself and discovering how you can become through the films that I do.
Well, thank you, Teng. I think it's important to note like that Teng is from Mindanao, which is historically had closer links to maritime Southeast Asia. And I want to shift pivot now to to the problems of representation maybe, uh, and and problems of curating like and organizing Philippine documentary or cinema. And yeah, maybe you could tell us more about your vision for organizing Salamindanaw, and and having like a solid festival in Mindanao, in southern
Um,
Philippines.
Salamindanaw started in 2013. Uh, so the primary goal of Salamindanaw was really to present new voices in international cinema. Then it was Salamindanaw International Film Festival. So we had films from different parts of the world, usually first or second films. But I guess a few years later, we found we realized that there's a need for a solid platform for Southeast Asian cinema, especially films that come from places not in the center. Like for instance, in Yogyakarta or Palu or Makassar in Indonesia, or Kota Kinabalu, or and Kuching in Malaysia. So because a lot of filmmaking also happening in other Southeast Asian cities outside of the capital, and we saw that uh, we should be able to give a platform for these filmmakers. So in 2015, Salamindanaw International Film Festival became Salamindanaw Asian Film Festival. It's really focused on Asian works, new works from Asia, and we also have a kind of focus for Southeast Asian cinema, uh, uh, especially in finding works that are somehow emblematic of the diversity of Southeast Asianness. So when the festival usually awards the Golden Durian Prize for best film, and it has become like a tradition that the grand jury prize was a film awarded to a film that that espoused a certain uh, facet of Southeast Asianness. So it was not intentional actually, but somehow all the juries came up with that type of decision. So it became something that was a part of the evolution of the festival. We because of the pandemic, we had to pause for 2 years, but this year we're planning to hold the festival again. Hopefully, a face-to-face, a physical event. Because I know a lot of things are going on now in Asia, in different parts of Asia. a lot of new works are now are finished or are in post-production right now. So we want to somehow help in rebooting Southeast Asian cinema, because that's what Salamindanaw Asian Film Festival is really doing for the last few years.
And how important was it to like build these bridges, because you focus primarily on films and filmmakers that are based out of these capital cities, and how important was it also to build kind of like in terms of representation and solidarity?
I think because in the Philippines there's been a regional cinema movement for many years. So we've embraced this movement as a very good uh, evolution or development in Philippine cinema. So we now have films coming from Mindanao, from Cebu, and other parts of the Philippines, which is in contrast to the situation like 20 years ago, in which all films came from Manila. So while we took pride in this regional cinema movement, other countries, for instance, Indonesia, had this reluctance in using the term regional or peripheral, because according to their own experience, being peripheral, being regional, had this connotation of being second class or second best. So I guess Salamindanaw really became like a, uh, 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 um, a space in which this discourse and this conversation can take place, that being regional, being peripheral does not necessarily have to be being parochial. So somehow it's giving us a sense of of solidarity and pride that filmmaking can happen outside of Manila or outside of our film centers. And in this filmmaking, there could be new expressions and even new aesthetics of cinema that might not sit well with how things are being done in the center. And I think this is what we're trying to capture, the evolution, development, and no, because we feel that this decentralization of filmmaking in Southeast Asia or in Asia is not only a matter of practice of making films outside of the centers. It's also developing sensibilities, artistic expressions that are unique to where these films are coming from. And I think in the future, hopefully, we'll be able to come somehow study and analyze how these things can contribute to discussions of colonial cinema, for instance, or of post-national cinema.
Thank you, Teng. Let's go back to the national though. Maybe we can you can ask Jewel a little bit more background about the impulses behind the Daang Dokyu and organizing the Daang Dokyu. What's the vision behind it, and where do you think the aspirations behind it, and where do you think this festival is going?
Okay, so the Dokyu Festival was organized in 2020. Its preparations started 2018, but you could say um, the need for it, the documentary filmmakers had been talking about it since siguro uh, for like several years before the festival was organized. Many contexts to it, no, not just one. One context that was official, but you could say is an official context, is that the Philippine cinema celebrated its centennial, which started in 2018. And there were a lot of activities around then, and we were noticing as documentary practitioners that there hardly is any celebration or activity that actually highlight the documentary. So in a way, we felt like, okay, maybe we should initiate something. So um, there were 4 documentary filmmakers who started talking about it. There was me, Baby Ruth Villarama, Cara Magsano Kalipala, and Corinne Jimenez. We were talking about what can we do, what activity can we mount. It wasn't clear whether it was going to be a documentary film festival. I personally had always wanted to have a Philippine documentary retrospective. Medyo selfish. It was a little bit selfish on my end because one question I've always had is, what's my past as a documentary filmmaker? What am I continuing? What happened before me and before my contemporaries? We would know about documentaries that were made before us, but the knowledge was very limited. Very little information was being aggregated about not only the past of documentary filmmaking or the documentary tradition in the country, but also how it's developing. So it was at that time. So it was hard as a documentary filmmaker, like, to find a sense of community. So another thing that drove actually the mounting of the festival was us trying to look for a sense of community and seeing if it's possible to build the community around the documentary scene and filmmakers in the country. So yeah, when we found support for the project, then started the problem of, okay, where can we find the works? How can we represent 100 years of documentary filmmaking in the country? Where do we start? Do we start with research? Where do we get what kind of programming? So those were the first questions. One thing that we knew was that because we were documentary filmmakers, we don't want to use the occasion to highlight our own works. So first agreement that we had was, okay, we're not showing our own works. But that was also problematic because in the room, including later on 2 of the curators that we worked with, Ajani Rumpak and Sari Delena, were also like filmmakers whose works are very important. But we would later realize that there's actually a lot of films, and it's possible to come up with a program that does not only represent or does not focus on representing the best of Philippine documentaries. So the program was actually decided to be thematic around 6 themes. Originally, it was 5. There was the theme ecology, nation, taboo, localities, and future. And later on, when we went online, we actually had to add another program, which was a martial law program, because of what was happening in the country in 2020 when we were shifting the festival to an online platform. So yun. So those were, I would say, the difficulties finding works, deciding about how to represent the 100 years, how to represent the nation. But also, like, one thing that was important for us was finding the audience for documentaries. So those were things that we were balancing. What type of programming would we think would expand the interest for documentary as a form? So there was a lot of negotiations all the time about, okay, the kinds of films that we would show, how we put together films, combining popular and unpopular titles, short and long. Another limitation when it was not yet online was the time, actually, kasi cinema. It was going to be at the UP Cine Adarna, so there's very little time to represent 100 years dun sa time slot that was available. So yun. But there are also thrills in programming. I personally spearheaded the finalization of the program. It was very thrilling. For me, like, looking at all those works and discovering new things every time you see them. That's very thrilling. One thing that that I learned organizing and finalizing the program for this festival was that you can actually look at documentaries not only as individual works, but also as works that continue each other's not aspirations, representations, etc. That they represent a larger meaning when curated together, or even as an entire incomplete collection that's continuing itself. So one thing that we wanted to bring out of the program was the continuity, the historical continuity, how documentaries from the past actually can be seen and proven significant and relevant until today. Films that speak to each other or contradict each other, that's also one theme. Films that build up on each other's meanings. So we knew na there are very few rock star documentaries talaga that would draw the crowd. So we wanted the films to build up on each other's power and each other's content and offer something that the documentary form can offer uniquely. Ayun. So at the eve of publishing the program, I was always watching the entire lineup from 0 second to the 10th hour, like as a marathon. Parang it was like marathoning a Korean drama. So I thought, okay, this is not very bad because I could also marathon a Korean drama. So I'm going to sit through this like entire 10-hour, 12-hour program. And while I was doing, just to see if we did it right, because of course we are anxious about our program. And then in these sessions that I would review the program before its publication, I would realize these works actually are powerful. To me, at least, more powerful as a collection. And the documentary medium has, yes, its power as an art, also as campaign materials or issue-based works, etc. But they do have something that I think, in a way, substitutes what we can start to think of or touch as a historical memory somehow, regardless of the intention of the documentary work or the single works that are there. So it's true that, yes, the meanings of documentary are created kumbaga, because of the filmmaker's subjectivity and also what's being presented on camera. But also, when you look at the documentary or a documentary with time inserted in the picture, like 2 decades, 3 decades have passed, then it feels like all those times that passed also compound on the meanings that are embedded on the film. So, for example, a film that was done in the 1980s could have its meaning during that time. When it's found again in 2020, then it would have a thicker layer of meaning on top of it. So that was very thrilling for me to discover watching those works, and also empowering in a way, because that made me understand that our works, even as we all suffer making them, are larger actually than our intentions, larger than what we imagine they can do, larger than what we think they're useful for. And so yeah, and in a way, I wanted that discovery to be also reflected in how we programmed and publicized the film. We definitely don't claim that the Daang Dokyu Festival is an exhaustive program of documentaries. That's simply impossible, because alongside the program, I was also heading the research about making the database for Philippine documentaries. And while we were doing that, I was really stunned by the number of titles we found, and stunned again when I realized that there's another task of trying to find where these like more than 1,000 documentaries are, and what these like enormous amount of documentary material can tell us, reveal to us what illusions they can break, what assumptions they can prove wrong, etc. So I would say it's hard to say there's a documentary that represents Philippine documentary history. It's a festival that represents something specific. It's really part of the continuation of the journey of documentary in the Philippines. It's a beginning of a discovery, I would say. We don't know where it's going. It's definitely not an annual festival. We are not full-time festival organizers. So for now, what I did was that I created a website called daangdokyu.ph, which is a database that encourages filmmakers to contribute their films so that we can all form a continuously growing database of documentaries which the public can access while documentary archiving and databasing in the Philippines is ongoing, is an incomplete task. So yon, so all I can do for now to put a cap on the initial effort that revealed a lot was to create this tool that things could still continue while we know that the larger task is not yet done.
Yes, thank you, Jewel. Like, to borrow the name of your initiative, no, cinema is incomplete.
Yes.
From representations of nation in documentary and a larger history, maybe we can move on to Shireen and the kinds of communities and research that you're doing with Los Otros and Tito and Tita, and your own curatorial work for, with like programming, curating, like artist moving image that maybe not that are maybe peripheral to documentary but not quite, and also maybe a little bit of, maybe you can say a little bit about Kalampag, and maybe that's like, because we're talking about history and representation and the absence of such histories for documentary, much else more elusive in experimental video and film.
Yeah, yeah, maybe I'll start since you're talking about Kalampag, Merv. So Kalampag is kind of an ongoing project that Merv and I started in 2014, I think, and it was to sort of create the first impulse was to create a screening program of Philippine experimental films, and it turned into this kind of self DIY archiving because we found ourselves with such little to work with. So it was, but there are a lot of works that we had heard about that we had to track down, and so it was a way to so it turned into this self archiving and also kind of community building as well, because we realized that there is such a kind of disconnect between the generations of practitioners of experimental film, and I guess the older ones tend to look at their time as the golden days, and then but then there's like a less of a connect to the current generation, that they don't really know what's going on now. Some of them have sort of moved into feature filmmaking, and some of them so a few of them still make quite experimental ones, like, and Roxley was one of the few who continued that on that path. But it was like yeah, I had to work really with the artists, the filmmakers, and then try to reach out to other communities, the wider experimental film community around the world. And there's quite a number of artist-run film labs, people who still work with the celluloid film, and so we found that there's a great sense of camaraderie between the labs, and that there's so much, there's this is being shared. I guess it's kind of a dying they say it's like a dying a medium, but it's very much alive in these circles. But it was a way to sort of reach out to this wider community, and we found ourselves, gifted a couple of labs gifted us, the apparatus that we needed to view some of these works that we, on film, that we were not able to view otherwise. Like the National Film Archive of the Philippines doesn't until now, I don't believe they even have 16mm projectors. So we were lucky enough to have been gifted by other labs, these projectors, these splicers, to work with what we had and try to view them and then get them back into circulation, to have them viewed and to use that as a way to generate interest in the program, interest in this field, and to get other institutions and more grassroots communities involved. And so it was really with the help of these other labs, and then other archives like Asian Film Archive, and that we're able to get these works rescanned and made better versions of them, and then keep the momentum there, to keep generating interest in this this kind of filmmaking. And so kalampag in Tagalog it's a word that refers to a sound. It's like a bang, a clanging, a kind of rattling sound. And it draws attention to itself, and it sort of implies that something's not working. So it's usually used in reference to a machine, or anything from a car to an electric fan. So what we wanted to do was sort of create this kind of rhythm, another kind of rhythm with the works. So use the screening program as an experiment in itself, to try to use how to bring together works that would bounce off of each other and create this kalampag, to imply that something is not working, but also to create some new force, to create some new energies, and to bring together works that are not laid out very linearly, but sort of they just work in a different way, in a formal level, how they generate new energies and meanings. And so so that's an ongoing project that we're trying to work on another edition of. And so Los Ochos is it's a name. It means the others in Spanish, reflective of our Spanish sort of colonial past. But it's a word that my partner and I, John, he used to refer to his sort of space that he had in the early 2000s, and then it turned into different things, and now it still refers to our place, a house that sometimes we create we hold screenings and workshops on the first floor to share the works that we feel won't get shown otherwise here. Works that are sort of in between a lot of things, in between a lot of categories, and some people, works of people that we also know personally. So it's kind of a way to bring together, to share our network that we're privileged to have, and to sort of share it with our local community here. And so it's just coming together of different energies. Tito and Tita is a sort of collective that's a collective of friends coming together to make works. I guess we were all kind of disillusioned with this whole idea of names. So Tito and Tita means uncle and aunt in Tagalog. And we really wanted to, we were kind of disillusioned with the whole idea of, having to sell yourself and to sell, your name and its brands and everything. So we really want to just call ourselves something that is kind of very basic, something that everyone has and relates to. And then it's kind of a platform for us to make works that are not only to be screened, but also kind of in between performative performance and installation, and also photography, and to keep experimenting actually with all these things.
Thank you, Shireen. And I guess what really ties the three together, Daang and Jewel and Shireen, is really like this sense of like community building and reaching out and negotiating these histories to be put together and creating solidarities. And I think, and this perhaps is not really isolated to just the Philippines, but to a lot of different places around the world that still question like history, nation, and cinematic forms. And maybe now we can move on to the to questions of the on the floor. Maybe there's some of you that would like to write in some questions to any of our panelists and maybe the festival organizers and curators. Wood PY is here as well. No
好，
questions yet?
那欢迎大家写问题哈。
You're all welcome to write down your questions in the chat while you're
分享有一些
maybe thinking and organizing your questions. Maybe I can raise my question first. I do have some questions. So about this special program, focus program, we call this Necessary Fictions, right? It's about Philippine documentaries. But for most film festivals, when we focus on a country or a nation, we usually use it as a frame so as to organize the mainstream works under that frame or in that frame. But for our program, we are kind of against that mainstream idea. So I was just listening to Jewel, Daang, and Shireen. You're focused on local communities, or a rather experimental, or rather maybe minority communities. And Jewel is very ambitious on even organizing 100 years of documentary films in your country, right? So my question is about what's your imagination for documentary? Because usually documentaries stand on the opposite side of power. So you as organizers, who's your the person in opposition of your conversation? Who do you want to talk to as an organizer? So maybe you can share your experience as a curator or organizer. Thank you.
谁可以先来说说呢？
Who would like to go first?
I think you should. Merv, 也许你来。
Merv? I think it should be the first one because we've actually discussed this a lot of times.
Wow, okay. I thought it was gonna be Jewel. I was looking at Jewel. Yeah, I think there's a politics of exclusion always. Like these country surveys, no, and you really have to boil down to certain constraints. It was really hard to narrow down this kind of selection, at least with the experience between like the IDF and myself, Wood and Peiwa, because of we all had our different impulses. And I also wanted to address the fact that May is elections month in the Philippines. Where I did a lot. I think we have to bring up the fact that there are particular histories that are getting obscured, and we have to also like highlight this in the program somehow, while at the same time, like how do you give like a Taiwanese audience an idea of this kind of filmmaking from this particular region, and also give it a nuanced perspective. So it was a mix between like greatest hits and the more maybe obscure, peripheral, like maybe like not the obvious choices. But one thing that we had to also really consider, and perhaps maybe fell back a little bit on, we have our own lapses, is like the impulse, the need to also represent different regions, the different perspectives from different parts of the Philippines. But that might mean it would be something like a nation, a program by attendance, like check, you have this map, and then like you try to get as many filmmakers and films from those different parts. And but there's this push and pull of what this program could be, and like what kind of filmmaking and tendencies. So I think, like Jewel said, no, it's still a progress, and that we're still deliberating. There was actually so much more that we wanted to fit in, and but we had particular constraints, and the main ones being money and time. And also we can't pick the ones that were recently featured in TIDF, meaning like stuff that were shown like just 2 years ago, which we really wanted to show. We can't. So yeah, which kind of gave us some natural borders in articulating this. And but we were also very conscious of like also gender and like representation, perspective, and also like region. But maybe I can throw this back to Jewel.
Okay. I'm not gonna deflect that anymore. Actually, when Wood asked that question, it's like a heavy cloud over the top of me, because there's really a lot of things that we're trying to respond to. Like the works that we make are like works that we really invest a lot of heart and soul and energy and time, and like seeing all the other works that other filmmakers do and organizing a festival around them, and then you get exposed to to many other works that a lot is invested in. So siguro I'll answer this on a more personal note, no, rather than as an organizer. I think things that motivated me personally, and the things that I organized for the Dokyu, and also beforehand, I also organized another film festival before that. That was my first, which was less publicized. It was supported by Movies That Matter. That's Nation in Visions Film Festival. It's a co-curation among many different curators of alternative cinema spaces. It did not try to achieve a singular view of what's important. That's like a little bit opposite of the methodology of the Dokyu, which actually offered 6 themes that we want the public to pay attention to. But in general, I think the things I personally want to respond to are the themes, or the questions of human rights, of memory, and the use of the image. The meaning, what is the image for? These are things that I, in particular, have been grappling with for the past several years, as I also finished my 2017 documentary. These were my questions. After I finished my second documentary, In the Claws of a Century, one thing that was the onset of the Duterte administration, people started getting killed in the streets in huge numbers that were unimaginable to us. And then, as somebody who devotes most of your time to image making, your question is, how does my image respond to that? How do images respond to concrete problems such as this? And then I immediately realized the reason why it's very easy for people to get killed here, and it's very easy for impunity to reign, is that the value of the human life is very is degrading as well. And And I realized that if you address the question of human rights, for example, you cannot talk about it in terms of just the rights or the Universal Declaration of Human Rights or what's written. Um, uh, Fighting or aspiring for human rights, that also involves elevating the value of what constitutes life, for many people. For example, life, the appreciation of life is not, it's not always kumbaga, tied to the question of its political significance, but also like appreciating human rights is also being able to appreciate that humans um, are diverse, or humans think different ways, they have different values, um, they love, they have families. There's various a multitude of facets that can be considered human. And cinema is a medium that's good at that, making you understand the depth of being human. So I understood right away that in the fight for human rights in my country, it's not just about um, highlighting films that are outright advocating for human rights. It's also about enriching the sense of, or the appreciation of the value of life in general, the value and what and everything else that comes with it. And the arts are very powerful for that. Another theme that we've been trying to confront, not only with our filmmaking and programming, is the question of memory. We are in the middle of historic national elections, as Merv was saying. Our history is being rewritten. Um, uh, both sides, parang monolithic views of what the country is about, what's good for the country, what the past was, are being like manufactured and echoed almost thoughtlessly. Now there are two big camps. There's pink, and then there's the red. One is talking about love in these elections. The other is talking about unity. Um, each one is saying that they are in the right side um, of history. So there's a lot of work involved um, in diversifying our or and looking back at how complex memory really is. And so we do not always we do not become prone to uh, monolithic thinking, which are a good precondition for authoritarian rule, just like what's been happening in the Philippines. So that's one thing that we are also responding to. And as I said, another thing that we are responding to is the question of what's the role of the image in these times. In particular, what's the role of documentary? Not only its functional role in terms of responding to issues, but to the process, to our human processes. So those are the things that are working in the background and in the soul as we organize these initiatives.
Maybe Daang or Shireen can add something. I think, well, just to add, no, I think the programming, at least for this edition of this program we co-curated with Wood and Pewa, was deliberately quite political in nature, but not so obviously political. I think it's important to articulate like how it affects individuals, because if you for example like look at the martial law, which is quite distant, or like human rights atrocities across different decades in the Philippines, or the ongoing conflict of Mindanao, they can be really quite abstract. Like they can just be numbers and statistics to some people, but I think it's important to give like personal and more intimate like perspective to these, and hopefully that comes across more to an audience, that like these geopolitical state actions can actually really have an effect, and this is what's happening, and this is like a vision of that. And I think that was one of the things that like Wood and Pewa and I paid attention to with like selecting the program. Would you agree?
Shireen 跟 Ten 有要回应刚刚的问题吗？
Any feedback from Shireen or Ken?
No. OK， 好，如果没有的话，那个对话框有一个问题哈。
If not, I think there's a questions in the comment.
朱尔刚刚有提到纪录片
Is that Jill mentions about documentary focused on human rights.
这个政府或者是威权政府，它
If the films
或者说
ban your films or your film is censored, what do you do? Or how do you respond to this kind of questions if your films are censored?
应该是朱尔先回答哈。
Maybe we'll refer the question to Jewel.
The thing is that it's censorship in the country is not like it's not very categorical, but it happens in a lot of soft ways, which are also getting harder the past years. One way that censorship could happen, or like films that deal with history, with human rights, happens, for example, is like the military red tagging people who are organizing screenings about the martial law films that were done in relation to martial law that try to remember the atrocities of the martial law period. I personally experienced that. We were being called, or the schools that would host screenings would be warned by the military, or the military would put out a statement to the media that communists are infiltrating the universities already. So these are the ways that the censorship could happen. And how do we respond? I think the landscape of Philippine alternative cinema is wide and diverse enough that we're able to make ways actually to distribute films that are strongly themed. For example, very recently, the film Aswang by Alex Sarupak had been really widely screened even while Duterte is in power. The team, I think, were expecting like stronger censorship of their work, but actually did not happen. So how do we respond to that? We continue looking for ways to show the films. And it's really a good thing that there's a wide landscape of alternative cinema spaces and also initiatives in the country. There are a lot of organizations, even if films don't go to the cinemas directly, so organizations would sponsor their screenings. Yeah.
那我是不是可以请 Ten 也分享一下他
Maybe I can invite Ten to also respond to talk about your personal experiences regarding to censorship.
还在吗？
Hello, Ten, are you still there?
不确定。OK， Are you here? Ten?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, please.
We just had a power interruption here in Mindanao. So I'm looking for a place that has light. So, okay. Hello. I'm good. So what's the question again?
想请 Tem 也分享一下
Yes.
你
So Tang, would you
工作
please
经验上面
share with us your past experience facing censorship?
Wait. I'm looking for the interpretation. I'm using a phone right now because we don't have a internet right now. So again, the question was
电影创作跟审
Yes.
查
So your past experience facing censorship and your also film creation.
okay. I think the so far I haven't faced a direct censorship, but since I make films with very sensitive subjects, people around me somehow try to warn me of the effects of dealing with these subjects. And I remember a few years ago, I made a film called Forbidden Memory, which is about a massacre that happened during the height of martial law. When I was doing the film, it was during the process of making that film that people started to warn me about the repercussions of making that film because I would be exposing a lot of things. When it was screened, eventually, it was a welcome event. I think when Forbidden Memory was screened, it was also the time when um, the remains of Ferdinand Marcos was buried in the National Heroes cemetery. So there was a very hot political situation during that time. In the past, I also tried to make a they thought that I was treading on a very dangerous subject. So it came to a point that the MLF Central Committee issued like a gag order to people not to talk to me. So when I was doing the documentary, when I approached people, they would say we cannot talk to you because there's an order that says that we cannot talk to you because you cannot make that film. But I was still very adamant in making that film, and I remember um, my father received a call from the leaders of the MILF and other intermediaries to talk to me to stop making that film. And then it was during that time that I realized that perhaps I really had to pause and make that film and from making that film. And uh, somehow I didn't finish that film. Uh, I guess the Philippines is one of those countries in which we don't really see the or we don't really have uh, or we can somehow avert censorship because we have alternative spaces to screen our films because we don't usually screen in theatrical spaces or in cinema houses. We have alternative spaces, so somehow we also have a big community in which we can go around to screen our films. But the danger usually takes place during the process of making these films dealing with very sensitive subjects. Okay.
好的，谢谢。那
Thank you.
时间的关系，我们大
Due
概
to the interest of time, we have probably the last 5 minutes. So if you still have any further questions, please raise them now in the chat.
我也想问。
we will wait for maybe some last questions. And before we end the session, I would like to ask all the panelists if you have anything you would like to say to the Taiwanese audience. We see audience coming from Japan as well, and some from Taiwan, and some from the Philippines. So please feel free to share your thoughts with the audience.
好，大家如果没有看到观众有问题，那我们做最后一轮的发言，好不好？
So maybe we can start our last round of speaking.
先好吗？
Let's start from Merv.
Maybe reverse back to me. Maybe
Okay.
I pass it on to Shireen.
好，
Any last
那
words?
Shireen 好了，Shireen 讲了。
I still boggled. Yeah, I'm still thinking about your earlier question. What about for for who we do this, what we do, and also I don't know. I don't know if I have an answer for that. I don't think I do, but I guess we well maybe from what we keep doing for Los Ochos and for the other things that I do. Maybe it's I guess a driving force is always to just to keep making sense of things, and to be present. I think I've always struggled with that, feeling that I'm not really present in when I'm in the moment, and it's how to keep moments alive. Really, I think that's a driving force for us, for me. How do you keep a moment alive? I think in filmmaking it's particularly relevant because there's so much that sort of kills the initial impulse. I think your initial impulse to make a film is so strong and so vibrant, and there's so many things that weigh you down and that can take away that initial impulse. But it's how to keep that spark alive. And I think important thing is to be attuned to what's going on, and to keep up this kind of what's the word, your relationships really with others and other groups and other activists and other in different in all senses of the word, in relation to things that can divide and that create a sense of what's the word? Yeah, I'm not too sure what I'm trying to say, but yeah, just to keep in touch also, to keep on top of. I think it's easy, especially in times like this, in the pandemic, to sort of be lost in your own sort of bubbles. But I think like to stay in touch with others is very it's really important.
好，谢谢。那我们请朱儿好了。
Thank you. And then Jewel, please. Some thoughts to leave with the audience.
Yeah, so thank you very much for organizing this panel. It's always feels like we are in solidarity with the audience of TIDF and the organizers. You actually catch us now in a very difficult time. Tomorrow is a momentous time in Philippine history. A lot of us are really not just on our toes, like we are at the edge of our seats, emerging from the 2 years of lockdown, probably the longest lockdown in the world. Is it? We thought that we are out of the water, and then we realized that the water is actually still so much higher. That's how it feels for most of us. It's quite overwhelming, and it's actually also a good time to take the opportunity to really ask yourself fundamental questions, not only and fundamental questions as well about your filmmaking, your practice. In a time like this, where do you find yourself? And like slowly, it's starting to, like, one lesson that's starting to dawn on me is to never forget your personal human relationship with your craft, at the same time that you consider it as something that's functional, that's actually useful for a society, useful for a movement. For instance, in our case, at the same time, um, we should never lose. I feel like I should never lose the authenticity of my relationship with it, because in the end, what makes up society, but it's individuals. Um, so, yeah, yeah. I don't know how to move forward from there. We probably can talk in a more articulate way, like after these coming days and weeks. For now, like, this is where you find us. This is like documentary itself.
谢谢。看你有一些可以
Thank
分
you.
享。
Tang,
Yeah,
to share anything?
I think from where I stand, it's really important to be able to know the place as a source of images and stories and narratives. And I guess from where I come from and from how I practice my cinema and my curation, I really am looking for diverse representations of people, of stories, of all these things told from very specific points of view. And I really welcome new expressions from, especially from emerging filmmakers who can express themselves and their perspective of the things around them, and it's happening everywhere. And I hope to continue to do that, to look out for new voices, to look out for new talents. And I also recognize that these voices, these new talents, they don't have the same perhaps exposure to cinema. Some would be raw compared to others, which would be more sophisticated. But I guess it's really important to start somewhere and to just do it, and hopefully they'll find themselves in this long and beautiful journey of making films and making documentaries. Thank you.
好，谢谢。那这个圆圈圈就回到
Thank
原
you.
点。
And finally, we're circling back to Merv,
Okay, sorry.
the
No,
starting point.
Yeah, I think it's still really a battle for memory. And that's something that we really had to think about with doing this program. But like how and which memories to prioritize, especially given this very anxious kind of context. You have the elections tomorrow. It's a make or break moment. It's still an ongoing conversation, and perhaps we'll have a different perspective on May 11 when we have a different panel that's really more focused on the politics, which is quite timely because it'll be right after the elections, and maybe we'll have a different idea. I don't know what's going to happen. I haven't been sleeping well. So, yeah, I think, like I echo what Tang said. Always be critical of where images are coming from. Always be critical with presentations of and notions of truth. Because like everything is subjected to particular powers, like, and these forces dictate how images are formed, and with various and varying like relationships to reality and truth. And this is something that particularly with documentary is an ongoing struggle. Thank you.
谢谢。我想大家提到的这些内
Thank you.
在外
Yeah, so all the external and internal factors that you mentioned, they are very important elements that formed many important works. And many of you mentioned the election. And for us here at TIDF, we are quite anxious about it too, because nobody can really predict how it is going to go down like. So we stay critical. We try to maintain this clarity no matter where we are, where you are. I think it is very critical. So thank you very much. On behalf of TIDF, I would like to thank all the panelists. It is our first international online forum. I benefited a lot from the discussions from today. And as you know, Taiwan is physically very close to the Philippines. But Taiwan honestly is unfamiliar with the Philippines. And with this focus program, we have selected 46 films. It is very important to Taiwanese audience. So through the works, the audience definitely know more about the Philippines. And it's very important for us, for the film festival. And finally, thank you very much for all of your participation. And this upcoming Wednesday, we'll have a 7 to 9:30 p.m. online forum again. So hope to see you then. Thank you very much. Until then, bye.
Yeah, thank you. See you. See you on next Wednesday. Yeah. Take care, everyone. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.